Fat, the path to ketosis. Now, I know that might sound confusing because we talked about lots of important things in previous sections, and yes, making sure that carbohydrate consumption remains way down is essential to putting your body into ketosis. Moderate amounts of protein, essential to ketosis. But if you want to make the body understand that fat is the predominant fuel source, we need to consume large amounts of fat, and not only that, the right fat. So let's get right to it. So the first thing that I want to talk about with you guys is the molecule of a triglyceride. Now, triglycerides are going to be essential in creating ketones. So let's go through it together. So here we have one molecule of a triglyceride, okay? And there's going to be two parts to that. There's going to be the glycerol backbone, and there's also going to be 3 fatty acids. Now, the glycerol backbone can actually be used in a process called gluconeogenesis, which we're going to touch upon in just a few minutes, and the 3 fatty acids are going to be essential in creating ketones. So let's go through it a little bit more and talk about how exactly this all happens. So we have fat and we have glucose. These are the 2 primary fuel sources that the body can possibly use. So what happens after this? We ingest fat and we ingest glucose. And what do they break down into? Fat is going to break down into fatty acids, as we just said with the triglyceride, and glucose is going to break down into something called pyruvate. Now, the really interesting thing here is that what happens after this? What do they break down into further? So the fatty acids are then going to be broken down into something called acetyl-CoA, and glucose is going to be broken down into the exact same thing. So what is acetyl-CoA essentially? Really, acetyl-CoA is the central currency for the body to create energy. What happens is the body takes acetyl-CoA, it brings it to the cell, to the mitochondria of the cell, and this is where energy is created. And it's created in a form called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and this is how energy is going to be used in the body. But let's talk about this from the perspective of somebody who's in ketosis. So let's picture that. This person here is in ketosis. Now what's happening here is that we're going to have an excess of acetyl-CoA because we are eating lots and lots and lots of fat. And so the body knows this, because it knows that, well, this person's not eating any carbohydrates or little amounts of carbohydrates. So that acetyl-CoA is coming from your dietary fat. So what happens next? That acetyl-CoA is going to go through a process called the Krebs cycle. Now this is under normal circumstances, but we're talking about somebody that is in ketosis. So we have 2 components here. We have something called oxaloacetate, and we have citrate, and these are going to be 2 key components in the Krebs cycle. But again, we're talking about somebody that is in ketosis, so something different is going to happen. Now, oxaloacetate will be used for a process called gluconeogenesis, and we talked about that briefly before. Gluconeogenesis, what exactly is this? This essentially means to create new glucose. So for anybody out there who is worried, well, I'm not eating any carbohydrates, that just doesn't seem healthy, it seems like the body needs it. Well, you're absolutely right. We don't necessarily need dietary carbohydrates, but we do need glucose, all right? And this is how the body naturally creates it when you're not getting dietary carbohydrate. So oxaloacetate is going to be used for gluconeogenesis, and then with the excess of acetyl-CoA, it's got to go somewhere. That excess amount is going to create acetoacetate. And acetoacetate is essentially a ketone. And from acetoacetate, we've got beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetone. And essentially, this is how ketones are going to be produced. Now let's go through a few points here. Fat needs to be high. 65 to 90% percentage is determined by your goals and your history. So let's dive into these numbers a little bit further and go over this chart together. Now, I know this chart looks a little overwhelming, but I promise you it's all things that we've gone over in past sections. Let's just put it all together. So we've got person type, and then we have the respective macronutrient numbers for that person type. Now let's go through the person type We have athlete slash active, these first two. Then we have normal blood values. Then we have high serum lipids slash insulin resistance. Then we have pre-diabetic and therapeutic. So let's go through some of these. We have the athlete slash active individual. That active individual is going to be, let's say, 3 to 5 days per week of resistance training. They're looking to maintain muscle mass. The athlete is trying for performance. So as you can see here, the fat percentage intake is going to be lower, but that's because the protein consumption is going to be higher. This individual is more insulin sensitive. They can handle potentially protein actually activating the pancreas. Remember, sometimes protein can solicit the response of insulin. And not only that, we have carbohydrate consumption ranging between 5 and 15%. This person can handle the higher amounts of carbohydrates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this person should do that. Then we have normal blood values. This person's going to hover around 75 to 70% fat from their intake. And as we go further down the list, we have high serum lipids slash insulin resistance. This person is probably knocking on the door of pre-diabetes slash diabetes. And as you can see, the fat numbers are going up while the percent carbohydrates are going further and further down. They will be the lower limits of 5%. And then of course we have pre-diabetic and therapeutic, and this is just going to be the extreme ends of high fat and low carbohydrate. But if you're somebody who is looking at this chart and you're like, I just don't know my health level, I don't know if I have high serum lipids, I haven't been to the doctor in a while, I don't know what to do, where do I start? So a nice sweet spot to start would be a 70-20-10 split. We have 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carbohydrates. Let's just say for the first month or two, you don't see the results that you want to see. Maybe you're not feeling any different, you're not feeling fuller, you're hungry all the time still, you're still craving carbohydrates in high amounts. What you can do is make little tweaks to this percentage. So instead of, let's just say, 10% carbohydrates, you can lower it to 7 or 5%. That's going to help mitigate the insulin spikes. You can also increase fat consumption. You can really leave protein where it is, but just kind of play around with the fat numbers and the carbohydrate numbers. The type of fat your body prefers to burn is monounsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids. Whenever you're consuming fat, fat is always going to come in 3 types. So let's go through it together. So we have polyunsaturated fatty acids, we have monounsaturated fatty acids, and we have saturated fatty acids. Now the body stores fat in these 3 different types. Not only that, we consume fat in these 3 different types. So if you can kind of put those 2 together, it would make sense that the more of a certain type of fat you eat, the more of it you're going to burn off your body, and that's exactly right. So the largest percentage that your body stores is going to be the monounsaturated fatty acids at 55%. The second is going to be saturated fatty acids at 27%. And the third is 18%, under a quarter, with polyunsaturated fatty acids. So bottom line here is, okay, if you want to burn the majority of the fat off your body, consume monounsaturated fatty acids. If you want to burn the second most type of fat that your body burns, you're going to be burning saturated fatty acids and then polyunsaturated fatty acids. So let's go through some of these fats together. We have coconut oil, and it's at 92% saturated fatty acids, very efficient there, and lower on the other ends of polyunsaturated fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids. Butter, 68%, a little bit more balanced, 28% monounsaturated fatty acids. Beef tallow, pretty balanced when it comes to monounsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids. Bottom line here is as you go down this list, you're going to find saturated fatty acids go down and polyunsaturated fatty acids go up. Remember what we discussed. Monounsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids are the fats that you want to have the most of. This is what your body stores the most of. So let's continue to go down the list. We have beef tallow, palm oil, olive oil, lard, safflower oil, canola oil, peanut oil, corn oil, soybean oil, and safflower oil. What I would recommend is that the fats that you consume the most of is from lard and up, with the exclusion of palm oil. Palm oil within the last 60 years has only been started to use in actual foods. It actually started being used in machinery. So take that for what you want to take it for. Next list, we have sour cream, heavy cream, and large eggs. They have a great balance of saturated fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids. Keep in mind here that the eggs have a little bit higher content in polyunsaturated fatty acids. We haven't discussed this yet, but polyunsaturated fatty acids can be problematic if you're consuming them in high amounts. We're going to go over that in just a bit. Olives, avocados, very, very rich in monounsaturated fatty acids. And then we have our nuts, macadamia nuts, cashews, almonds, peanuts, pecans, walnuts. Macadamia nuts, almonds, and cashews are a ketogenic dream. All right, so make sure that you incorporate these into your intake. Next, we have cheese, cheddar, Swiss cheese, and cream cheese. They are high in saturated fats, but have a nice moderate amount of monounsaturated fatty acids. Beef, salami, pepperoni, bacon. For the most part, all meats are going to be very well balanced between saturated fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids. The ones, again, you want to watch out for are going to be lean chickens and lean meats. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are overemphasized. What I'm trying to say here is that we live in a society today where supplementation is king, and we are told to consume probably more omega-3 and omega-6s than we actually need. Omega-3s are important for cell health. Omega-6s are problematic if you consume too much of this, and let's talk about that a little bit. So we have omega-6 on the left and omega-3 on the right. Omega-6, let's start with that, found in soybean oil and palm oil. So soybean oil is used in a lot of products, in particular mayonnaise as well. Mayonnaise is a nice ketogenic tool, but remember, you want to make sure that you use mayonnaise that is made with olive oil. Soybean oil contains lots of polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-6 in particular, and too much omega-6, which we're going to talk about, can cause nausea and GI distress. Palm oil is found in many manufactured foods because of its preservation capability. Palm oil high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. We mentioned it before, decades ago, palm oil was first used to lubricate machinery. The only reason why we brought it over is because we had an excess amount of it. We figured, how could we make a profit of this? And the way that we saw this was that this fat is very desirable to taste. And on the right, we have omega-3 content found in deep sea fish, tuna, salmon, herring, and sardines. The deeper the fish, the higher the fat content, the better quality omega-3 you're going to get. Important for inflammation and maintaining healthy cell membranes. Omega-3, bottom line, is very important. We can get it simply by just eating those deep sea fish. It's not something that we need to overconsume. Again, it's something that we need to have supplemented into our diet. Not necessarily through supplementation, taking pills, powders, but through eating foods naturally. So, a reminder, omega-6s in our society, we tend to get an excessive amount. The reason why is because we are finding soybean oil, palm oil in lots of manufactured products. Reason being is because shelf life is higher, palatability is higher. This is a polyunsaturated fatty acid you don't want a lot of. And as a society, we are deficient in omega-3 fatty acids. And I'm going to say it one more time, remember, 18% of the fat that you store is going to be polyunsaturated fatty acids. That is a very low amount. We don't want to consume high amounts of this. It appears a lot in manufactured foods. If we consume a lot of these manufactured foods, we're going to find ourselves with gastric disturbances and possible health detriments. So make sure that you're having high amounts of monounsaturated fatty acids. Then next is saturated fatty acids. And then the last one is polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, omega-3 and omega-6s, these are the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And just because They're called essential fatty acids. Doesn't mean they're essential to your diet. It just means that they don't come from within the body. We have to go outside of the body in order to get them. All right? So let's touch upon a couple of more things with omega-6 concerns. There was a study done by Volek and Finney. They are the authors of The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance and Living. They did a study on cyclists, endurance athletes, and they wanted to see the effect of a ketogenic diet and cyclists. But what happened was the diet was comprised of high amounts of fat, but in the form of omega-6s. And the endurance athletes were actually getting very nauseous, and they didn't know why at first until they came across the mayonnaise that some of the athletes were putting in with their meat. So if you're using mayonnaise with soybean oil or palm oil, make sure to change that out with mayonnaise with olive oil. This is going to be very important. Again, elevated omega-6 consumption when on a high-fat diet causes GI distress and nausea. So this quote touches upon omega-6 consumption and GI distress quite nicely. We've met numerous people who tried a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet and promptly quit it saying, "I couldn't handle eating all the fat." When queried, they often noted that they tried to eat healthy by avoiding animal fats, which means they probably were eating way too much omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, and this is from The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. Don't fall into this trap, bottom line. And remember, monounsaturated fatty acids at 55%, saturated fatty acids at 27%, and polyunsaturated fatty acids at 18%. Make sure that you are consuming high amounts of monounsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids. It's going to go a long way to putting you into ketosis. So what are some of the key takeaways from this section? One, we've got 70, 20, 10. What does this mean exactly? 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carbohydrates. If you already have a macronutrient breakdown in mind for you, go ahead, start with that. But if you're not sure, start with 70, 20, 10. If in the first couple of months you're not seeing the results that you want to see, decrease those carbohydrates. And if that's not working out, increase the fats then. Okay? Play around with them. So what type of fats are we going to be having? We've got monounsaturated, saturated, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Mono at 55, saturated at 27, and polyunsaturated at 18. Remember, polyunsaturated fatty acids are the type of fat we want to have minimal amounts of. We've got omega-6s and omega-3s. Just because they're called essential fatty acids doesn't mean that they are essential and you need to have lots of them. We can get omega-3s from those deep sea fish and nuts. This has been huge. I am so excited for you guys. We've done carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We've got all this information. We're going to put it together for you in the next sections. I'm super psyched. Can't wait. See you guys there. What's up, everybody? So we've learned so much up until this point. We talked about leptin and insulin, the two hormones that are at the forefront of energy metabolism. We talked about dopamine, the neurotransmitter, which is essentially going to be the carrot to the donkey. So these three things are going to be pulling us in the direction in which that we want to eat for palatability and not necessarily for general health. We also learned that carbohydrates, proteins, and fats need to be in a specific percentage in order for us to achieve ketosis. So we learned the bigger picture type of things so far in order for us to get into ketosis. Now what we're going to do in this next section, we're going to talk about minerals and hydration. There's something called the Keto Flu. You've probably heard of it. If you haven't, essentially what it is, it's just a few symptoms that are unfavorable. Typically it can be cognitive fogginess, it could be low energy, dehydration, and we want to make sure that we mitigate these symptoms and that we make our transition into ketosis as easy as possible. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but we want to make it easier for ourselves, making sure that we're getting these minerals and making sure that we are well hydrated. So let's get into it. This is the next section, minerals and hydration. See you guys there.